Welcome back to Road to Recovery podcast. Unfortunately, my partner, Tommy, cannot be here today. He is suffering from some injury, so we're wishing him the best. But that doesn't mean the show must go on, as they say. And we are joined here today with somebody whose name I am sure to mess up. It's Talia. Is that at least partially right? Talia,
yeah.
Talia. Not even going to pronounce the last name. It's right there.
It's right there, yeah. So Talia Cecchele.
Cecchele, but she's
nutrition.
Yeah, she's a registered dietitian who specializes in eating disorders, and she is a myth-busting son of a gun. I'm telling you, I love it. I was looking at your Instagram. I love anybody that is in the field professionally and has all that myth-busting stuff, because there's so much stigma around any of these types of things, or just health in general, that they're just insane. So I wanted to get this going and firstly ask you about, what was your inspiration to getting into nutrition and becoming a dietitian specializing specifically in eating disorders? Because that's kind of a more rare side of things.
Yeah, it's very niche for a dietitian. So if we just start sort of first with becoming a dietitian, I was very interested in food and cooking and sports when I was younger. And I played representative netball, and we actually had a dietitian come and speak to us when I was about 15. And I just, from that moment on, I knew that's what I wanted to do. So it's a bit, bit lucky, I guess, that I knew from such a young age. And then I went to university and studied dietetics. And it was about 3 years out when I got a new position at a pediatric hospital. And on the very first day, my manager was allocating my wards to me, and she said that you're covering the eating disorders unit. And I was a bit scared at first, because as a dietitian, it's an area that is quite niche and specialized. I just sort of fell into it. And from that day on, so that's over 5 years now, I've been working in eating disorders and loving it.
That's really admirable, because I don't meet a lot of people, and a lot of people just in general, like people that have eating disorders, especially male people with eating disorders, don't want to talk about it at all. It's a very kind of hush thing. It's being more and more put out into the mainstream, which is awesome. People talk about it much more openly than they would have even 10 years ago, which is really great. And I'm thankful to have people like you that are interested in getting into this type of stuff and kind of delving into that layer of muck that is the eating disorder world.
Yeah.
But I am curious.
You're so right about the male percentage. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's actually pretty startling, the amount of males that suffer from it. And I go to the gym and I see people that I know have some sort of body dysmorphia going on with them, whether that is manifesting an eating disorder or not, I don't know. But body dysmorphia within and of itself is much more prevalent than I think people think.
Definitely.
So, yeah. But I'm curious, what has been kind of some of your biggest hurdles in your advocacy for eating disorder recovery? And is there anything you'd restructure in the care setting of those receiving inpatient or outpatient care? It's kind of a heated question. Yeah.
This is
loaded.
So much bigger than what I am able to control. But there's obviously not enough funding in eating disorders and mental health in general. And where I see a really big gap is, not only being able to access treatment due to whether that be funding or stigma. So I've worked with a lot of people that have, years before coming to see me, have gone to a GP and either been told to lose weight because they've been in a larger body, and the GP has not known that they've had an eating disorder, which has been very triggering, or people that have been of a normal weight or even underweight, but have just not been sick enough to actually get help. So definitely, advocating for education for doctors, so they can actually diagnose this early on rather than waiting till it's, much more complex and people are much more unwell than they could be. So I think that's definitely one gap. And then the next is so we know we have inpatient treatment and outpatient treatment, but there's not much in the middle for people. I don't know what it's like in the States, but definitely in Australia, where I'm originally from, and now I'm working in the UK in London, there's not as many sort of daycare centres or day treatment centres. And I think having that gap between inpatient, where it's so intensive, 24-hour support, to then drop into an outpatient setting where you might have, you know, a dietitian session and a psychology session once a week each. It's just, sort of setting you up for failure. But unfortunately, there's not much at the moment that we can really do. So it's just, advocating and getting the funding for that sort of treatment.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good point that you bring up about that in-between time between being inpatient and outpatient. I was never an inpatient. I did all of my stuff outpatient. Sometimes in retrospect, I kind of wonder if at my 88-pound low point with having exercise addiction and OCD and all these different things playing into a manifestation of my eating disorder, anorexia, should I have been, quote, institutionalized or inpatient somewhere? At the same time, what I've seen with a lot of people that do go into inpatient, and this is just my experience and observation because I'm not an expert.
Yeah.
What I've seen is people go into these situations and they get refed, they get into a state where they're in a no longer physically harming state, like they're not in death's door. And then they get out and then they end up in this relapse state because they think it's gone. And I see this with other YouTubers who have dealt with eating disorders and just get back into this YouTube game and having to look a certain way and all these things. And then just in general, they get back into old patterns. And I even find myself, even now, I am still in recovery after. I call myself pseudo recovered because a lot of the mental work still needs to be done for myself. But what I see is that there needs to be some sort of, like you said, ongoing therapy even afterwards, after the main medical condition is taken over. I think that's where a lot of the stigma with some of the medical community, at least what I've seen in here in the US, is that a lot of doctors, at least general practitioners, look at it strictly from a physical standpoint.
Yes.
And so they assume that, like, I'll go in and be like, oh, your weight's good. But my mindset is like totally not, it's totally off kilter still.
Yeah.
No, continue.
No, I was just going to say, so even, when we look at discharging someone from an inpatient setting, we usually aim for discharge at least a BMI of 15 or 16, because the evidence supports that you're not, psychologically at the stage of being able to commit or engage to psychological therapy until you're at a higher weight. So then you get discharged from this really supportive environment at a bit of a higher BMI, but then you're deemed too well to be able to access a more supportive treatment. So it's exactly what you were saying. It's very much weight and physical health focused, and we're just missing that link.
Yeah, and I think this goes even beyond just the eating disorder kind of community part. I think it goes into other types of things, like I've mentioned on my channel and here a few times, that I deal with other chronic illness complications associated with it, and people with those things often find themselves in the same situation where, like, well, nothing shows up, so it's like there's no care for that, and then mental care is not there. So it's just advocacy, like you said, is the number one thing we can do, which can help in turn hopefully raise funding to get what needs to be done. So you as a registered dietitian, as a nutritionist, what is your, I suppose, structure for dietary intake regards to optimal diet for recovery? Like, as we see, there's like tons of different crazy stuff in the health community. I'm like a health nut, and this is something that I've been interested in since college, since before I developed extreme eating disorder tendencies. I was just always fascinated with physiology and how diet and stuff you manipulate. I just took it way too far. But there's so much crazy stuff. There's so much things that when put into the wrong mindset can be dangerous, like vegan, carnivore, vegetarian, there's keto. All these things are kind of thrown around and can be detrimental to people with this type of mindset. So what would your structure for dietary intake for optimal, like, diet recovery be when you're working with someone with an eating disorder or binge eating disorder or something like that?
Yeah. So my approach is definitely not sexy. It does not sell, but it works. And it's really just it's taking it back to the very basics of nutrition. And my saying is nourish with balance. So there's no restriction, there's no fad diets, there's no cutting out particular food groups. It is, 3 meals, 2 to 3 snacks a day. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner have a balance of your key macronutrients, so protein, carbohydrates, fats, with some added veggies or fruit. It's including all foods. So having, processed or high sugar, high energy foods, which I think is such a key part of recovery, not because, there's a component of challenging fears and rules about those sorts of foods, but also, normalizing them. We know, a big part of what I do is making food neutral. So there's no black and white, good and bad, healthy, clean. I do a lot of, work on food neutrality and challenging those food beliefs. When it comes to particular types or patterns of eating, so, thinking about intermittent fasting, veganism, vegetarianism, those sorts of things. I think nowadays it's a bit trickier than when I first started working in eating disorders because veganism has exploded.
Yeah.
And even, as a dietitian, I'm very much aware of the environmental impact of the way that we eat. And I do know that we need to make choices for sustainability and for the environment. But for recovery from an eating disorder, I generally try not to have someone on a vegan diet because it is more difficult just in terms of getting the right nutrients and enough calories from the food that you're eating, particularly if, vegetables are so fibrous and filling that if you have to eat 6 times a day, these huge portions of meals can cause quite a lot of discomfort.
Yeah.
And it really limits your ability to challenge a lot of those dietary rules or fear foods that you might have developed through having your eating disorder. Yeah,
no, that's a really good point. And something Tommy would point out if he was here is he himself was vegan for a very, very long time. I've known him for several years, and we actually both met because we were both doing YouTube. He was doing eating disorder space up. I was kind of working in more of a comedy space up, but we both had this eating disorder commonality. So that's how we got to know each other. And he's very passionate about a lot of the ethical aspects of veganism, which I completely respect, and they're totally valid things. But he mentions during his recovery, it was actually very detrimental to his health.
Yeah.
He actually suffered from, I believe, a lot of like deficiency problems, specifically like in like iron, and I know you can have like B vitamin deficiencies sometimes, B12.
B12, yeah.
And I think when you have the eating disorder mindset and the eating disorder voice type of the stuff, it's kind of a dangerous game to play, messing around with anything that is remotely in the name of restriction of something, because you have to question. And this is something that I've had to do because I've had to make certain dietary changes just to manage my own neuropathic condition, because I noticed certain things flared up and certain things don't. But I have to ask myself always beforehand, before I make an action, is this from the guise of health, or is this my eating disorder voice telling me to restrict? And this is something that my recovery coach has had me basically write down and question. So I think if anyone's listening that's going through any of type of stuff like that, is before you do anything, always ask yourself, where is this thought actually stemming from? I think that's a really important point.
Definitely. But no. Is it coming from a place of restriction? And I always try, if someone does, come and see me with some sort of dietary restriction, whether it be vegan or they've cut out a particular food group, or they're on like the low FODMAP diet because they have IBS symptoms, particularly for veganism, I say that you can be vegan later, but right now it's not the right thing for you. And you can do, lots of other things to still support a vegan way of living, whether that be clothing or makeup or whatever it is. You can still do your part, but right now this is not the best option for you.
Exactly. That's actually a really, really good point. And there's always a way around the line.
Yeah.
So.